There is a mystery, a riddle hidden in plain sight, one that stretches from the ancient scrolls of the prophets to the silent cry of your soul. It is not new, though it feels unfamiliar. It is not hidden, yet few see it. It is the mystery of motion without movement, effort without breakthrough, of wandering in a wilderness long after the cloud has moved on. You feel it. You've named it stuck. But what if that feeling isn't just emotion? What if it's revelation? In ancient days, the people of God stood at the edge of promise, yet they did not enter. They circled the same mountains, walked the same paths, repeated the same prayers, and still the walls did not fall. The manna fell, but they grew weary of it. The tabernacle stood, but they longed for more. They were free, yet not free. Delivered from Egypt, but not yet delivered from themselves. They had left the bondage, but the bondage had not left them. This is the pattern of the ages. And you too have inherited it. You stand in the place between what was and what must be. You've prayed, you've fasted, you've cried out, and still nothing moves. The doors remain shut. The heavens seem silent. The vision tarries. You wonder if you missed it, if you've fallen out of step with the divine rhythm, if somewhere in your story you've taken a wrong turn. But what if the silence is not absence? What if the delay is divine? What if being stuck is not punishment, but preparation? The ancient Israelites were stuck not because God had forgotten them, but because they had forgotten Him. Their hearts longed for the leeks and garlic of Egypt more than the milk and honey of Canaan. They moved, but not forward. They obeyed in body, but rebelled in spirit. And so they wandered. Not because God was cruel, but because He was faithful. Faithful enough to not let them enter into promise with an Egypt mindset. Faithful enough to purify them before promotion. And so here you are, in the waiting, in the pressing, in the stretch between the calling and the crown. And the question is not, why am I stuck? The real question is, what is God trying to reveal in the stillness? Because the place where nothing seems to happen is often the place where everything is being formed. The potter doesn't mold clay in motion. The seed doesn't grow while it's still in your hand. The oil is not poured until the vessel is empty enough to receive it. And sometimes to move forward, you must first be still long enough to be remade. So if you feel stuck, you're not alone, but you are also not forsaken. You are in the hands of the one who sees beyond the present, beyond the feeling, beyond what you think is the delay. You are in the pause before the shift. And the mystery is about to unfold. You may be moving, working, praying, even striving in the name of faith, and yet still feel as though nothing is actually changing. It's a strange kind of weariness, one that doesn't come from laziness or disobedience, but from the exhaustion of doing everything you know to do and still remaining in the same place. The ancient Israelites knew this experience well. They walked day after day in circles. Their feet were blistered from progress that led nowhere. They weren't sitting still. They were following the cloud, building the tabernacle, offering sacrifices. But despite their movement, they weren't advancing. They were moving, but not moving forward. It's a holy frustration, a sacred discontent. You wake up and wonder why you're still battling the same battles, wrestling with the same thoughts, stuck in the same emotional patterns. But here's the mystery. Just because you're moving doesn't mean you're progressing. And just because you're not seeing the outcome you desire doesn't mean God is absent. Sometimes He allows the illusion of motion to break the illusion of control. Sometimes He lets the wheels spin, not to punish you, but to draw your attention to something deeper, something you would never see if things were working the way you expected. Motion without progress is a divine interruption. It's meant to stop you, not externally, but internally, to expose the cycle, to call attention to a mindset, a wound, a fear, or a false dependency you've been carrying, to make you question what you've been leaning on. Because you can't fix what you won't face, and you won't face what you haven't noticed. And so God permits the pause. He allows the redundancy. He lets you hit the same wall until you finally turn not outward for another solution, but inward and upward. Sometimes the wilderness doesn't look like barren land. It looks like routine. It looks like doing all the right things and wondering why you still feel off, why the peace you once had seems to have slipped away, why prayer feels dry, why joy feels muted, why the vision that once burned inside you now flickers like a dying flame. This is not punishment, it is invitation. Invitation to deeper discernment, to examine whether you've been led by habit or by the Spirit, to discover whether the pillar of cloud has moved on while you stayed in the last place you encountered him. And when you finally stop long enough to notice that the rhythm has changed, that the manna is no longer falling where it used to, you begin to seek not just for results, but for his presence again. You begin to ask not why isn't it working, but what are you doing in me through this? That question shifts everything, because in that moment the wilderness becomes a sanctuary. The cycle becomes a school. The motion without progress becomes the altar where your striving dies and true transformation begins. You can walk out of a place and still carry its atmosphere within you. You can be liberated in the physical and still imprisoned in the spiritual. This is the paradox that defined the journey of the Israelites, and it defines the lives of many believers today. They had left Egypt. The chains were broken. Pharaoh's army had drowned in the sea. But though they were no longer in bondage externally, the residue of Egypt clung to their souls. They had exited the land, but the land had not exited them. This is the mystery of deliverance versus transformation. Deliverance is the moment the door opens and you walk free. Transformation is the long, often painful process of becoming someone who can live in freedom. Deliverance is the act of God, sudden, miraculous, undeniable. Transformation is the walk with God, slow, refining, often hidden. You can be delivered in an instant and still spend years unlearning the lies, the fears, the dependencies, the reactions, the identities that Egypt planted in you. When the Israelites faced hunger, they didn't cry out in faith, they remembered the meat pots of Egypt. When they faced thirst, they didn't seek the God who split the sea. They grumbled like slaves who had no voice. When Moses delayed on the mountain, they didn't wait. They built a golden calf imitating the idols they had watched for generations. The problem wasn't just in their circumstances, it was in their thinking. They had been shaped by generations of slavery, by the rhythm of oppression, by the language of fear. Freedom was their new reality, but bondage was still their lens. And so they responded not as citizens of promise, but as refugees of a past they never fully left. So many today are walking in the same tension. You've been delivered from the thing that once held you captive, be it addiction, fear, insecurity, toxic relationships, or sin itself. But if your heart has not been renewed, if your mind has not been transformed, you will find yourself recreating the very structures that once imprisoned you. You will return to Egypt in your thoughts, in your habits, in your choices, because you were freed in body but not yet in soul. That's why you feel stuck. That's why the new season feels like the old one. That's why the doors have opened, but you're still afraid to walk through. The wilderness was not meant to punish the Israelites. It was meant to change them. It was meant to strip off the identity of the slave and clothe them in the faith of sons and daughters. But they resisted the transformation. They longed for comfort, not character. They desired security more than sanctification. And so they wandered. Delivered but not transformed, free but still bound. This is why transformation matters. Because God doesn't just want to bring you out, He wants to bring you through and into. But He cannot bring you into promise with a mindset that belongs to bondage. You must be changed from the inside out. You must surrender not just your chains, but your memories of the prison, your way of thinking, your false identities. The pain you began to call normal, the patterns you mistook for personality. This is the invitation, not just to be free, but to be made new, to no longer live as someone who escaped Egypt, but as someone who has been reborn in the wilderness, shaped for the land of promise, because transformation is the bridge between deliverance and destiny. And until that bridge is crossed, freedom will always feel like a place just out of reach. There are seasons where everything seems silent. The prayers have been prayed, the fasts have been fasted, the tears have soaked the pillow, and yet nothing moves. No doors open, no answers come. You feel the ache of time stretching longer than you thought it ever would. And in that waiting, the question rises like a whisper at first, then louder, almost shouting in your soul, has God forgotten me? But what if the stillness is not a sign of abandonment, but evidence of God's most intimate work. This is where the mystery of divine process unfolds. There are moments in the life of every believer when it seems like heaven has gone quiet. It feels like nothing is happening, but it's in those very moments that everything is being formed. Just as a seed must be buried before it breaks forth, and just as a child grows in the secret darkness of the womb before it takes its first breath, so too are you being shaped in the hidden places, away from applause, away from the light, away from visibility, not because God has turned his face from you, but because he is too intentional to rush what must be refined. Look at the wilderness again. What looked like delay for the Israelites was actually a proving ground. God wasn't just taking them on a detour, he was taking them through a fire that would burn away what could not go into the next season. They had to unlearn slavery. They had to confront their fears, their idolatry, their fragile faith. In the silence, their true selves were revealed. In the waiting, they discovered what they really trusted in. That's the power of the stuck season. It doesn't create your character, it reveals it. In the same way, your stillness may feel like stagnation, but it is the ground where identity is formed. It's where the false things you believed about God and yourself rise to the surface so they can be dealt with. It's where your roots grow deep. It's where the Lord removes every crutch so you stand not on gifting, not on charisma, not on your plans, but on his word alone. And only there, when you're emptied of your striving, your entitlement, your need for control, only there can he fill you with the weight of his promise. Consider the life of Joseph. He had dreams in his youth, promises of greatness. But before the palace, there was the pit. Before the throne, there was the prison. For 13 years, he endured silence, not because God had forgotten, but because God was forming a man who could carry the authority of Pharaoh and still walk in the fear of the Lord. Joseph wasn't stuck, he was planted. He was being matured, not punished. The same is true for you. The wilderness is not the absence of destiny, it's the forge where destiny is purified. It's where calling is stripped of pride, where ambition is replaced by obedience, and where potential is tested until it becomes integrity. And often, the longer the silence, the deeper the work. The more sacred the calling, the more hidden the preparation. So if you find yourself in a place where nothing seems to be moving, don't panic, don't rush to escape, don't despise the slowness. Because in the stillness, God is crafting something eternal. He is doing what speed cannot do, what crowds cannot applaud, and what shortcuts cannot achieve. He is preparing you for something your current self cannot yet hold. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. You are not stuck. You are being shaped for glory for the one silent day at a time. There are things you cannot carry with you into the next season, not because they are too heavy, but because they do not belong to the land of promise. They are the remnants of Egypt, the mindset, the behaviors, the attachments, the identities that were shaped in a place of bondage. You were never meant to bring them with you. They were only meant to be part of your journey out, not your journey in. And this is why the feeling of being stuck often lingers long after you've been delivered. Because while your body has left the place of captivity, your soul still clutches pieces of it. God is not merely relocating you, he is transforming you. And transformation demands that certain things die in the wilderness before you can inherit what has been promised. Look again at the people of Israel. They were given every opportunity to let go of Egypt, its idols, its culture, its fear, its dependency on human masters. But over and over again, they returned to it in their hearts. When adversity came, they cried out, not for deliverance, but for the comfort of slavery. Let us go back, they said, back to what was familiar, back to predictability, back to the chains they understood rather than the freedom they feared. Egypt had become their reference point. Even in freedom, it shaped their desires. It framed their expectations. It determined their reactions. And so God, in his mercy, allowed an entire generation to wander, not as punishment alone, but as purification, because what could not be removed from them had to be buried with them. They could not possess the land until the land of Egypt had been fully removed from them, not just geographically, but spiritually. The same principle applies now. You cannot walk into destiny dragging the baggage of captivity. You cannot step into newness while clutching the language, the logic, and the lies of your past. And so God permits the wilderness, Not because he is cruel, but because he is committed. He will not allow you to walk into promise with the very things that would destroy you once you arrive. The habits that kept you alive in Egypt will strangle you in Canaan. The relationships that sustained you in survival mode will collapse under the weight of purpose. The attitudes that helped you cope in bondage will sabotage you in freedom. So he lovingly waits. He leads you in circles, not to frustrate you, but to wear out the parts of you that still bow to Pharaoh. He strips away the comforts that used to console you so that you'll learn to be sustained by him alone. He surfaces the hidden idols, not to shame you, but to set you free from their grip. Because you cannot carry Egypt into the promised land. Not if you want to stay there, not if you want to thrive there, not if you want to last. It's not just about leaving the old behind, it's about letting it die. The wilderness is the funeral for the false self. It's where God buries your need for control, your addiction to people's approval, your dependence on your own strength. It's where he confronts the Egypt inside you and says, this must go. And the moment you agree, the moment you stop resisting the refining fire, something shifts. You begin to see that the wilderness is not a detour, it is the threshold. It's the narrow place between who you were and who you're called to be. And only when the old has been fully surrendered can the new truly begin. So if you feel stuck, ask yourself, what am I still carrying? What am I still clinging to that cannot walk with me into my calling? Because when you release what was never meant to survive, you make room for what was always meant to flourish. You've been taught to focus on the destination, to fix your eyes on the promise, the breakthrough, the calling, the dream. From a young age, you've been told to pursue the vision, to chase the purpose, to run after what God has for you. And there's truth in that. The promise is real. The destiny is divine. But in all the striving to get there, something essential is often missed. God is not nearly as concerned with where you're going as he is with who you're becoming. The journey with God is not a straight line from point A to point B. It is an ever-deepening process of formation. He's not trying to simply elevate your position. He's refining your person. Because in his kingdom, the vessel matters just as much as the assignment it's meant to carry. Your calling may be great, but your character must be able to hold its weight. And so he pauses you, not to delay your destiny, but to deepen your foundation. This is where many get frustrated. They interpret the slowness of the season as failure. They think the pause means disfavor. But what if it's the exact opposite? What if God is withholding the next thing because he's too kind to give you something you're not yet prepared to carry? What if the stillness is the very evidence that he's still working? Think about David, anointed as a boy, chosen to be king, declared to be the future ruler of Israel. And yet what followed was not a throne, but years of hiding in caves, dodging spears, fleeing from a mad king. It didn't make sense from a human perspective. He had the oil of heaven on his head, and yet his life looked like anything but favor. But in those caves, in that delay, God was forming the heart of a king. David had to learn to worship in the dark before he could rule in the light. He had to learn how to handle betrayal, isolation, injustice, not as a warrior, but as a son. That is what God does with those he loves. He doesn't rush the process. He doesn't promote prematurely, because premature promotion isn't a blessing. It's a setup for collapse. A calling received too early becomes a crown too heavy. So he waits, he trains, he cuts, he shapes, not to harm you, but to protect you from yourself. And here lies the great deception, thinking that arriving at the destination will finally fulfill you. It won't, because the fulfillment is not in getting there. It's in becoming who you were always meant to be along the way. It's in learning to hear his voice when no one else is speaking. It's in learning to obey when no one else is watching. It's in becoming someone who walks in authority because they first walked through the fire. The promised land is not just a place, it's a posture, a person, a maturity. The land is only as good as the one who inhabits it. And so God in his love will withhold it until you are ready to dwell in it with wisdom, with humility, with faith, with endurance. So if you feel stuck, maybe it's because you've been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, when will I get there? Start asking, what is God building in me here? Instead of striving for promotion, lean into transformation. Because God is not trying to rush you to a stage. He's calling you to a deeper place. He is not merely assigning you a role, He's forging in you a heart.